Believe it, you can mess up when you cook with butter. You can burn it, use the wrong butter, or even fail to use butter at all. Know what not to do and keep watching. The most successful way to consistently produce amazing baked goods is to follow the recipes that are right in front of you. There might be room for a little improvisation here and there, but baking generally requires precision. This is perhaps no more important than when it comes to butter. If a recipe calls for butter at a specific temperature, like room temperature or melted, then you better do what the recipe tells you to do. If you don't, you'll almost certainly be doomed. The need for butter to be the proper temperature has to do with the physics of the baking process. Butter functions differently in different forms. What can happen in melted butter cannot also necessarily happen in room temperature butter, and vice versa. Obviously, if you're going to use butter for frying, this matters less, as you'll be melting the butter in order to cook with it. But for baking, paying attention to the butter temperature that's called for in the recipe remains critical. If a recipe calls for softened butter, you want to make sure that it is in fact softened and not melted, which can definitely happen if you let it sit out for too long. If this happens and you continue to use it in the recipe, then your baked goods probably aren't going to turn out how you want. Instead, they'll be much denser. When confirming that your butter is properly softened, it should give just a little when pressed. If you do happen to over-soften the butter, don't worry. You can fix it easily enough. To save over-softened butter, rapidly chill it so that the structures inside the butter reform. While sticking the butter in the fridge may sound like a good idea, it won't chill fast enough if you do that. Instead, toss a few ice cubes into the butter and stir. Soon enough, it should be back in a softened stage and can be used once you remove the ice cubes from the bowl. Have you ever looked at a baking recipe and saw that it called for unsalted butter, but realized that you only had salted butter in your fridge, and then used the salted butter anyway? We're sorry to have to tell you this, but that was a bad idea.
Bad idea.
On a very basic level, unsalted butter helps you keep track of how much salt is going into a dish. This is important in baking, as nobody wants a chocolate cake to taste as if it came straight out of a salt mine. And it turns out that there's definitely a difference between salted and unsalted butter. If you don't have unsalted butter on hand when you need it, not all hope is lost. All you have to do is just adjust the other ingredients in the recipe. As noted by Cooking Light, each tablespoon of salted butter adds about 90 milligrams of salt to your dish. If you're using salted butter, you should also be sure to taste your food while cooking so that you can adjust flavors on the fly. You don't want to get to the end of the dish and realize that whatever you've made is borderline inedible, or at the very least, going to spike the level of sodium in your blood.
How do we reach kids today about sodium?
Oil and butter are not created equally. If you're trying to be healthier by using something other than butter when cooking, it's important to understand how other fats like oil work when compared to butter. Generally speaking, if your recipe doesn't suggest a replacement for butter, you should tread carefully when you seek out a substitute. That is, unless you're a molecular scientist, in which case you probably already understand the different compositions of cooking oils. Just because two fats may look alike, such as softened butter and semi-solid coconut oil, that does not mean that they function in the same way while your food is cooking. If you treat them as if they're the same, you'll end up changing the chemical makeup of whatever you're cooking, and thereby interrupt the chemical reactions necessary to prepare your food correctly. When you're looking to substitute oils in other cooking formats, such as sautéing or frying on the stovetop, pay careful attention to the smoke point. Simply put, when a recipe calls for an oil with a high smoke point, like safflower oil, you shouldn't use an oil with a low smoke point, such as extra virgin olive oil. Mixing these up could make for an icky, smoky mess in your kitchen. Creaming is the process of mixing softened fat, like butter, with sugar. The most likely place you're going to see this term is in baking, where creaming is integral in many types of cake batters and cookie doughs. Mixing ingredients like butter and sugar together helps to introduce air to the mixture, which then allows the creamed product to increase in volume. The air bubbles trapped inside stay in the batter or dough, and when baked, they help leaven the final product. To obtain properly creamed butter, you should start with room temperature butter. If it's too hot or too cold, it's not going to cream properly, or it will simply take too long. According to King Arthur Flour's website, once you start mixing, you want to look for a pale yellow color and visible peaks forming in the mixture. This usually takes about 5 minutes with a stand mixer. If you don't cream it long enough, you won't get peaks. And on the other hand, if you cream too long, the mixture could turn your baked goods gummy and dense.
Dense.
Yeah, you are.
A good thing to keep in mind when you're cooking or baking is that whatever you do, you should do it evenly. Think about all those times that you've bitten into something that was molten hot on the outside but frozen on the inside. It's not fun. In fact, it's pretty disgusting. If you're cooking with butter, especially when making sauces such as brown butter, you should make every effort to cook things evenly. High-quality cookware and a little know-how also go a long way in making sure everything turns out okay. But the simple act of making sure your butter is broken up into even pieces will go just as far. If you've ever thrown an entire stick of butter into a pan, you've probably noticed that it doesn't all melt at the exact same time. Instead, the stick slowly shrinks like an iceberg in a warm sea. By the time it's all melted, some of the butter has cooked much longer in its liquid form, which could alter the flavor of the final product. In order to have a consistent flavor profile across the sauce or dish, simply make sure that you cut the butter into equal-sized pieces before throwing it into the pan. Flavor crisis averted.
Crisis alert!
Butter imparts an amazing amount of flavor to both sweet and savory recipes all on its own. But it shouldn't be the only flavoring agent you use while cooking. Instead, you should utilize butter as a flavor aggregator by mixing other things in with it so that those other flavors are bolstered by the butter's richness. On the one hand, this could mean doing something as simple as creating a compound butter. Compound butters are easy to make and can elevate practically anything you might normally eat with butter. Take a steak, for example. When prepared, it might be seasoned with salt and pepper. If you take a compound butter with some chives and garlic and let it sit on top of the steak, you now have a fancy restaurant-style plating right in front of you. On the other hand, working other flavors into dishes with butter is also about balancing the butter's flavor with any additions. Have you ever tried to eat a pat of butter on its own? It's very rich, to say the least. When cooking with butter, you want something that will work to complement that savory, fatty profile. Citrusy options, such as lemon juice or vinegar, work particularly well to cut through the richness. When cooking with butter, it's crucial to keep an eye on how much you're using and at what temperature. If either of those factors is off while you're cooking pancakes, for example, you're likely going to burn your butter. Not only does burnt butter smoke and release a terrible smell, but the milk solids that have burned will turn black and taste bitter. If this happens consistently for you, then you should first look at the temperature at which you're cooking. High is not always best. You may need to lower the temperature and adjust it as you cook to prevent the butter from burning. Another easy fix is to simply use less butter. Gasp and cry foul if you must, but just as high heat isn't always the best option, more is not always better when cooking with butter. Start by using just enough to coat the pan. As you work in batches, you'll have to periodically add more butter. That might mean more work, but this approach should give you more control and should hopefully translate to less burnt butter. Butter and margarine may seem like they're basically the same thing on the surface, but they very much are not. Margarine was created in 19th century France when Emperor Napoleon III called for a cheap butter substitute that would be given to the lower classes and armed forces. Margarine is made from water and refined fats, where the water droplets are spread throughout the fat emulsion. One of the main reasons that people made the switch from butter to margarine is because the latter has a lower amount of saturated fat than the former. That may be a great thing to know if you're planning to put some margarine on your English muffin in the morning. But if you want high-quality baked goods, you should stick with butter. You simply can't expect to get the same results cooking with margarine as you would with butter. From a flavor standpoint, butter is going to provide a fuller, richer profile, which is already enough of a reason to use it for many people. Margarine also provides a different texture to baked goods. Because of its lower fat content, it's more likely to cause things like cakes and cookies to spread in the oven, which will then cause baked goods to get too thin or even burnt.
I can't believe it's not butter.
It's not as if butter is a hard ingredient to find when shopping, but do you know what is just as easy and entirely more satisfying than store-bought butter? Making your own. Plenty of people spent the COVID-19 lockdown learning how to make their own bread, so why not also make some butter to go on that sourdough? If the thought of making your own butter scares you, just stop and take a breath for one moment. To pull it off, all you need is one ingredient: heavy whipping cream. Then you just need the appropriate piece of equipment. Making your own butter is ultimately incredibly easy, especially if you have a stand mixer or a hand blender. If you don't have access to either of those, all you really need is a jar with a tight-fitting lid and a good amount of elbow grease. Just take your heavy cream, put it in the jar, and shake, shake, shake. At first, it'll turn into whipped cream. Keep shaking at this point. After about 15 minutes, the butter will begin to form. Still keep shaking. Eventually, the butter and the buttercream will separate, and voila! Now you have your own homemade butter. Just strain the liquids out of the butter solids and enjoy.
You can never have too much butter.
Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more mashed videos about your favorite foods are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.